Welcome everyone to another Dev Q&A. It is the first day of June, which is a shocking thing to say to myself. I don't know about the rest of you, but this year has been going very fast for me. Today we are joined by two wonderful guests, Simon, who you have all met many times at this point, and Andreas, who's an executive producer on Ravenbound. I know we've had the two of you on before. Andreas, it's been a while for you, and Simon, it's only been a week for you, but could the two of you, just for anyone that hasn't listened in before, maybe give a quick introduction to who you are, what you do on Ravenbound?
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Simon. I'm lead designer. I design and help other designers design and add things to our wonderful world.
Yeah, and I'm Andreas. I'm the executive producer for Ravenbound. Well, what do? I kind of enable people to do the best game we can do. Well, that's a one-sentence summary, I guess.
Yeah, we actually had a question that came in about that, that we might start with, just to kind of get people a bit of insight into what it is you do and maybe the perspective you're coming from when we're talking about some of these questions. So, like, as an executive producer, how do you impact things like, say, the 1.0.4 update that we just had? You know, what's your role in getting everything to come together?
Yeah. So one part is what I would call the traditional producer, perhaps, which is making sure that the team has all the best possibilities to do a good patch, in this case, the best game in general, and to kind of talk about the scheduling, talk about the time, the resources, the tools, everything around there, and making sure that the people can collaborate in the best possible way. But on the other part, I guess the executive part of the title is more, how does that all fit together into also becoming a product, right? How do we not only make the best game, but also kind of how do we talk about it as a product? So it's kind of a both pieces at once there.
Awesome. Okay. Yeah, thanks for that insight. You know, I think people are very easy to understand what a designer is, or sound designer, or an animator, or any of those, but sometimes producer can be a little bit more confusing for people that haven't worked in the games industry. So it's always good to understand kind of what your perspective is and what it is you actually do when we're asking you these questions.
It's very understandable. Like, I mean, the producer is what do you call it? Like product, project owner, or like making sure the project runs smoothly as possible. I have at some points called it like a producer should be kind of the oil in the machine, right? It's not needed for the machine, but everything runs much smoother if you do your work correctly.
I've often heard producers described as human spreadsheets. Confirm or deny?
Oh yeah, I mean, my Excel sheet kung fu is very high. I know all the macros.
We love to see it. Okay, let's maybe look at some of the questions that we've had come in from the community this week then. We've sourced some of these, as always, from Discord, and some of them from other places around Steam and forums and Reddit and all those kinds of places. So some of them are directly asked to us, and some of them are just things that we've seen people talking about that we maybe wanted to have a chat about. Starting off, we had a question that came in from Joe on Discord, who says, any plans on adding a photo mode? I love the scenery and the armor designs shown off in some of the pictures, and would love to be able to get more control over capturing those photos.
Right. So right now we don't have plans for photo mode, but it's always something that, like, depending on what the community wants, that like our plans can adjust. And if a lot of people want photo mode, and that seems to be the kind of the biggest urge at the moment, then obviously we'll consider adding it. It has been talked about before.
Yeah.
We've had, at one point, we even had someone working on it a little bit, but then bigger fishes came around and we tackled more pressing matters about the game. And so currently you could say it's like on hold, but yeah.
And if I'm to use my producer lingo, I would say like it doesn't have a high enough priority to work on now. There's more important things that we should focus on. For example, the 104 patch addressed a lot of those things which are obviously more important. And the future patch we will release at some point will cover a lot of that as well. But the photo mode is a, what do you call that? It's almost like a quality of life thing, right? It's not directly critical to the gameplay and kind of the overall kind of game loop, and that's why we haven't really prioritized it. We do agree that our game looks really beautiful, and you can actually, I've paused in my game and like looked at the scenery many times, even though like I've been a part of developing the game. So it would be really nice because it is nice. It is nice. Be able to take screenshots. But it's well, the producer answer is like there's a cost to it, and the priority isn't high enough at this moment.
And also, it's one of those things where it's like certain games have really stepped up the game of what like a photo mode can be. Mm-hmm. So I think there can also be different kind of levels. Like maybe if there's enough people who want it, but maybe it's not as high prio. Maybe we do some, like, you know, a small thing in the beginning where you maybe disable the UI but you don't have all the fancy features of a photo mode. Like it can come in many forms.
Yeah, exactly. You can also decide the scope, how the feature will actually, how complicated the feature will be.
Absolutely, thanks for the answer. I think the golden era of photo mode for me was always, you know, old racing games, Need for Speed games, those kinds of things. Even though they were the most basic photo mode, it made you feel so cool being able to take pictures of those cars. But that's just me going back to my old video games again. So some of those games gave you way too much leeway to take those photos. It ended up being almost more than the game itself. Moving on, we had another question came in on Discord from Pixel Rick, who's not actually here today, but has been doing some crazy things once again with speedruns in this latest patch, which we're all very excited to see. Question was, will there eventually be Warden defeat or Obliterated rewards? Possibly Obliterated would give a greater reward than defeated. I would like to see possible buffs based on which Warden you defeat, like a movement speed buff for Gale, or extra focus gain from Embers, or extra defense from Frost, those kinds of things. Is that something that we've any kind of thoughts on that we can share at the moment?
Absolutely. So starting off, we don't have any, like, it's not something we have planned for a specific time, right? So this is not something planned for any patch as of now. But we have definitely talked about it, and we definitely want to add this.
Yeah,
I would say.
Yeah. This is even like as you described it now, like that sounds like a high-level design pitch to me.
Yeah.
Like that's a really good kind of idea. So yeah, like that the Warden, the different bosses differ more, or like the rewards that you get from them differ a little bit. Yeah, that makes total sense.
Definitely. Like we want, ideally you would consider the Warden as part of kind of your build journey. Of like, yeah, I'm going to take that Warden because I previously found this other item, and that's going to work really great. So it is definitely a very, very interesting design space, and something we want to add to and expand on.
Yeah, and it fits thematically as well.
Yeah,
and also kind of in the meta progression of the game, as you mentioned, with which boss do I want to go for first, for example. So yeah, exactly, because we are looking into those kind of mechanics already, and this kind of fits into that. It feeds into that.
Yeah, I know we've had this.
So in due time is maybe the answer.
Yeah.
Awesome. Love to hear that. I know we've had this question from Pixelrick a couple of times. It's something that they're very passionate about. But yeah, I mean, I know progression as a whole is something that's still kind of an ongoing discussion in the design team. So it's not something that we have a perfect answer for yet. But like you said, I do think it's actually a really strong idea for how to go about it. Another kind of quick question following on from that's also kind of related. We're seeing some crazy new speed runs coming in from a combination of the new cards and new characters selected in 104. Now that 104 is out in the wild, are we happy with the results we're seeing from it? Kind of maybe just from your point of view, we don't have to talk for the whole team, but how are the two of you feeling about the update so far?
Yeah, if I start as kind of the producer perspective, yes, I'm very happy with 104, and the reason for that is we are seeing the type of feedback we get from it pointing us in the right direction, if that makes sense. Like, we know that 104 wasn't the biggest patch we ever made or will make, but we're kind of the things we added there with like the player select, for example, is an important kind of indicator for us that yes, we're doing the right things, and the feedback we got has been positive. So yes, I'm very happy with it.
Yeah, me too. Super happy, especially watching like Pixels Rick's speed run with like record after record. That was quite engaging to watch. I loved like they uploaded a video on YouTube for it as well. I watched through that. It was very interesting watching that. So really encouraging, and there's been several people posting really encouraging feedback about the character select. So it feels good that like we got all this feedback from everyone who was frustrated with how things were, and we could then take that, and it impacted our plans, and it like now that area seems to have actually improved. So very happy with that. It feels like a good clear loop that we want to continue expanding on and doing things that way. So
definitely, yes.
Awesome, great to hear. Kind of touching on that, I know we've had some discussion, or we had a little bit of a discussion about this before we hopped in here. Have there been any kind of unexpected outcomes from any of the new systems introduced, maybe the new cards in particular?
You mentioned something, Simon.
Yeah, so not regarding the character selection necessarily, but when it comes to cards, I think there's two things. So one thing is we found an unexpected bug with one of the cards, where it's like if you play a Destined Fortune, that kind of breaks your cycle of cards. Like that basically resets the amount of cards you've played in the vessel screen. So if you after that placed Inner Growth card, I think, which allows you to draw a card equal to the amount of cards you've already played in that visit to the vessel screen. If you play the Destined Fortune right before it, basically you're not going to draw any cards because it resets that whole thing. So that was an unexpected. That's more of a bug, but an unexpected bug. And one learning for a card, so we saw Minor Pandemonium seems to be working correctly, but it's in certain situations you might play it and it drains a card that costs the same mana as Minor Pandemonium, meaning your mana doesn't change. And with the current kind of, there's no clear celebration for what cards get drained, so you don't necessarily see it. You don't necessarily see how kind of the flow of your mana changing, and that can make the card seem bugged. And there was another learning with that card where people were not necessarily expecting their folk bonus to trigger. So we tried to word Minor Pandemonium so it used the drain keyword, and then you have the folk bonus that is basically adding a bonus whenever you drain a card. And I think there's the distinction of, since you never experienced the game without a drain bonus, it almost feels like your folk is giving you the ability to drain a card, and therefore it reads weirdly. It feels more like when I drain a card regularly, I get this effect, and then this other card drain. Like it's So it's also learning of like how we treat tags, kind of, and
how to synergize, kind of.
Yeah. So we need to kind of make it clearer, or we need to avoid cards that do things in this way. So I think Minor Penalone is really fun, but that was an unexpected kind of. We need to be a bit more careful when we do cards like that, I think, in the future.
I mean, if I can elaborate on like unexpected outcomes in general, I think it's, especially with the cards, I think it's interesting that we have the amount of cards now that it's almost like we can have like emergent gameplay coming from like just the amount of cards, now you combine them and how they synergize, which we won't figure out until we put it live almost, right?
Yeah.
Which is kind of interesting as well. I kind of like that, but obviously it's going to be, I mean, you could be able to break the game, and it's like it wouldn't be balanced perhaps, and so it's going to be a constant struggle, but kind of process to kind of keep it roughly balanced, but also don't get away from that emergent kind of feeling of, now I'm discovering this really new cool combination of mechanics and cards, and it's so it's a balance there.
We definitely found that, like, we had an internal playtest just yesterday testing some of the upcoming cards, and there was like 3 different people found 3 different unexpected things happening with their cards, where it's like really, really fun, because you see these things and it's like you get that unexpected, like, because we want that unexpected synergy. Like in an ideal case, we make sure that the card works properly with all the common synergies, but we don't know about all the synergies. That's a good place to be in. We want everyone to be on the journey of figuring out all the possible combinations and synergies that the game can have.
Yeah, right. And I think there's maybe some extra freedom for that, because we're not in like a multiplayer competitive environment. We don't necessarily need everything to be perfectly balanced for that. You know, we can kind of I guess we can strike a balance between balance and, you know, that kind of, like you said, emergent gameplay. And you know, really maybe occasionally allow some crazy combinations through that it's just maybe difficult to execute, or, you know, takes a little bit of planning or a little bit of luck to get to. I know for me it's really fun when you find some of those unusual combos. You know, maybe you only get to play with them for a little while because they're too broken and we have to get rid of them, but, you know, hopefully it's a case where we can always have some of these fun things for people to discover.
I mean, it's fun to feel like a badass.
Yeah.
It's,
It's kind of like the balance we want to go for, right? Is that like a challenging experience that you can master. So if you become really good, you can make anything work on the base difficulty. Like if you get good enough, you are not beholden to any luck. However, we definitely want a case that like that's really like that perfect run feeling where everything just lines up and you become an unstoppable force. Like that should exist. Like getting overpowered is fine. That's part of the experience, actually. That should happen after a couple of runs, that you run into a perfect card draw that just makes you unstoppable.
Yeah, I've had 1 or 2 of those, and I've still managed to be stopped, but that's more of a hands issue than anything else.
There's always going to be skill as well. I also noticed a skill level being too low. So
yeah, but that's something also we are like constantly tweaking, right? Like I think since we want to make sure that we add new things, like these cards, for example, and we want them to be kind of like. They should have, we should know about the immediate synergies, but we don't want to know about all the synergies. So there's gonna be kind of this constant back and forth balancing. And there should be instances where you actually don't necessarily need to have that mechanical skill on the base difficulty, on the absolute first difficulty, if you have luck and get those cards like going.
The stars align.
Yes. So that's ongoing work, I would say, to really strike that balance between mastery and luck, kind of, and how those interact.
Yeah.
Awesome. Moving on, so this one is kind of maybe going back to Andreas a little bit. You know, what does it look like? How do we decide which features or bugs to prioritize for patches? This is a very broad question, I know. So like, feel free to answer it in whatever way you want. But is there a kind of a specific process we follow, or does it change from patch to patch? Can you maybe give us a bit of insight in that?
It does change from patch to patch, but if we start with bugs, there is a severity and a priority for bugs. For example, if the game crashes, that's a high severity and also a high priority. We really want to solve those kind of issues fast and quickly, so very high priority. And then we have other bugs, which are kind of like, I don't know what that might be, like some texture doesn't look as nice as it should be. I don't know. Like the game works, but it could look nicer. Like that doesn't have as high priority. So that's a constant kind of, we do bug triage, where we kind of go through bugs which we have in the backlog, and we look at them and say like, yeah, this is actually should be higher priority or low priority, and like which patch should they go into. So that's bugs. But for features, that's more difficult. It depends on what the feature is, how much time a feature would take to actually complete and to test and verify. There's a lot of steps to create certain big features, for example. But in general, we have kind of a, what we call it, a high-level idea of where we want to improve with the game. I mean, it's actually like the designers and the game directors who set that. I'm not really involved in that. It's basically like, what's the best for the game for the coming, well, can be weeks, can be months, can be year, but for the coming period, like what do we want to do? In what way do we want to improve the game? And then it's a balance of setting the priority. How important is it? How urgent do we think it is? Do we want to get it into the game? Versus what's the cost here? What's the time and effort required to do it? So it's a hard balance to do, but and I certainly don't do all of the prioritizations here. It's the whole team that helps out with this. So the features are tricky, but at least I think it's very important that it starts kind of the what we should do with the game, that's owned and kind of comes from the designers and game directors and kind of the people who like Simon, who kind of are into the very deep water of like design and knowing what's what makes a good gameplay or not. So.
And even I would say like it's all connected in that sense that like you might have something that's really important, but it maybe only touches a couple of team members, and it's something that we will have to, like, some changes you do, you kind of have to sit on them for a while to be able to properly test them, or like how does this change the game over like me playing the game every now and then for a longer time period. And then, so even if that might be a high priority, it might just be like, no, but given the time it's going to take, and that it's only a few people, you might work on something that's not as high prior for a given patch. So, and it's a bit of a puzzle, like who works on what and how that interacts. And yeah. So I think it's sometimes quite a complicated puzzle to see all the moving pieces, which might mean that something comes into a patch that doesn't seem like, why is this getting worked on when we have this huge other thing that we really, really want? And that might be because we are working on that, and we're trying to figure out exactly how it's going to work. And then sometimes it's easy to talk about us thinking about it, and sometimes it's harder because you don't know exactly how things are going to pan out.
And also some things we had in the game, in patches, for example, is we want to try stuff. We want to try ideas. I think for example the hatred system, which we remade, was it in 103? I think it was.
I think so.
Patch 103.
It was, yeah.
That's a good example. Like, we kind of figure out. We should look at how hatred works and how we explain hatred. We did a new take on it, and We did talk like, are we happy with this now? Like, are we like, is this the way to go? And we said like, yeah, let's try it out. If it doesn't really do what we want it to do, like then we change it again. So we also do stuff like that. That like, okay, so here's a kind of a work in progress thing, and we already know when we have it in a patch that we might change this in the future patch again. Because we want your feedback. We want to have that kind of relationship that we learn from you.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks for that insight. It's always interesting to hear kind of how much of game development almost feels like a game, like a puzzle game in and of itself, to figure out, like one of those like tycoon optimization games where you're trying to figure out, oh well, if I put this piece here it can do this, and maybe it's not the most important thing but it's the most efficient use of time, and all of these kinds of things. I've always kind of had that little mental image in my head of everyone on the team actually just playing Tetris with the team for each update.
Yeah, it's I mean it's like a game, right?
Yeah,
a game to make it.
Yeah,
Exactly.
definitely.
Okay, moving on from there, we have a couple of kind of relatively easy questions from here. So, any plans to add more world bosses, maybe wandering bosses that drop guaranteed rare cards or anything like that?
So right now we don't have concrete plans for a wandering boss that drop guarantee rare cards. Specifically, we are very interested in like new challenges, like new bosses, and we definitely don't want all bosses to be like wardens, where it's like you kind of have to engage with them. Like that, I think is part of the open world DNA, where it's like we want these optional things that you can do, ideally with the kind of the risk or reward aspect of like, is it going to be worth for me this run? Is this going to be worth it for me given my current kind of build? So we have our 2 open world bosses now. I think the game could work well with more of those, where you consider like, so that you get more into the situation where maybe one run you engage with some of them but not some others. So that is very interesting. Right now, it's not the things we are prioritizing the highest. Right now, we are working more on like progression stuff, for example.
Yeah, exactly. Progression stuff is kind of higher on the priority list there. It's also like world bosses. It depends on what you mean with world boss, I guess.
Yeah.
But having like wandering bosses in the world, that's also, well, in my producer lingo, a high cost
Yes.
feature. So that also factors into it.
Yeah, awesome. Kind of maybe a follow-on question from that, and I get the feeling that this is maybe also not a high priority at the moment, just given the focus that is on progression stuff. But do we have any kind of details or ideas of things that we're planning on adding to encourage exploration? I know, just off the top or off the bat, Potted Riches was one push in that direction. I think that's a really fun card to get people out and searching through the world to find that pot of gold. But is there anything else that we're able to talk about yet, or is that a little bit further down the line?
We have some things we can talk a little bit about. But before jumping on that, I would like to mention for the Potted Riches, I think it's one of those things where it's like we're kind of testing the water a little bit, want to see how people react, because that's more into the take of maybe some people want to not have, like, because as soon as you start adding exploration rewards, you could change it so the optimal path of the game becomes always spending a lot of time searching for these things. And we want to make sure that the game doesn't basically become a very long checklist of looking for things. We want you to be able to play fast, and that, like, it shouldn't be suboptimal to play fast. In an ideal world, there's like value to both, and Potted Riches, the balance we want to strike there is where it's like it has a place in the meta, but it's also kind of those things where you can opt in. if you want to play fast and you don't wanna, you wanna like beeline to the next thing and really push fast and use the open world aspect of the roguelite more as in like I have the option to choose my next combat encounter to adjust my build direction, because that's kind of the foundation of the open world in Ravenbound. It's like it gives you the option to direct your build, right? So we want there to be this, you get the card draw, and there you can decide that this card is for me because I'm an explorer and I want to play slow. Like you want to engage in that exploration. So the Potteridge is in a test for that to see how people react to that concept. But with that said, we are planning to add more things to find in the world, especially like between camps and towers, allowing you to take the Raven form again. However, we want to strike that balance I just talked about. Like, we don't want the optimal play to be to look for things. Because when it becomes that, like, we are basically telling people to, like, scavenge the entire world every run. And that is, that would work fine if this was not a roguelite where you're going to play over and over again. But now, since we have these runs, we want them to be a bit more fast-paced. You shouldn't feel that you have to engage with the entire world. Every run you engage with different parts of the world to different extents. But so what we're planning to do now is to add basically rewards that you can find that you need to unlock. And unlike chests that are locked by hatred, these are unlocked by a new resource, and you basically have X amount. So every run you have X amount of resources to engage with these other rewards that you find in the open world, and you can choose to use them all early. If you have problems beating maybe the first boss, you can use them early, but we want them to be in a way where when you pick them up has meaning. So it doesn't become this checklist of I jump in, I use all my resources to pick these things up, and then I play the game. It should be, that can be an option if you need a power boost early on, but if you want to optimize it, maybe you engage a little bit with it over time. But it is really, I think, tricky finding that balance, and that's something we're going to continue kind of monitoring. But we definitely want to add exploration, but we want to add it in a way where it doesn't become optimal to play like very, very, very long runs where you have to kind of vacuum up the world. It's almost like we shouldn't use the word exploration, encourage exploration, but more that we want to enrich the world, kind of. Yeah. Like we want to make the world more engaging, but not necessarily like flying around to every nook and cranny in the world, right? Yeah, I think that's a very good way to put it. Yeah.
Awesome. Appreciate that. And we have one more question for today. Are there any plans to implement a Godmode or similar for those of us who want to play but are absolutely terrible at roguelites?
There's no Godmode specifically.
No, and that kind of goes against a little bit of what roguelike is, but I mean, there's possibilities for making it easier, for example, and the kind of the progression that you mentioned earlier is kind of a way to approach that. To like if you are not the one who is terrible at roguelites, right? Like you could. The progression system should reward you. Like you have a couple of runs under your belt, you have kind of leveled up your meta progression, kind of. That should also be a way to kind of progress and feel like you're making progress. So both ways should be valid, right?
Yes.
But not a God mode per se. I think that's a.
No, I would say like we are more or less adjusting the difficulty, not necessarily like right after launch. We adjusted the difficulty by nerfing. I think in our second patch we did a lot of nerfs to enemies, but in now it's more like we have certain periods in a run that are a bit more difficult than we want them to be on the base difficulty mode. But now, instead of directly nerfing them, we are basically adding in ways for you to become more powerful. So with the cards you saw, for example, in 104, they add actually quite a bit of power to players. You can really get a ton more mana now, for example, than you could before. Especially mid, kind of like, I would say, as soon as you start finding rare and legendary bounties, you are gonna be able to have a great time now compared to before. Especially like the inner growth card, for example, like being able to draw more cards in a run is very beneficial. So instead of directly adjusting the difficulty of some of the later enemies and bosses, we are trying to shift more power onto you. And that's an ongoing kind of work, but
But it's a great way of putting it.
And at some point, we are probably going to want to look at our difficulty modes, obviously. Like we have 3 today, and when currently the base one is the most balanced, we probably at some point want to spend a bit more time making sure that all of them are as engaging as they can be. And depending on what the community is asking, we might spend more time giving you finer detail, like finer settings for that difficulty. But that's not planned right now.
Yeah, no, exactly.
Awesome. Okay, yeah. I think Godmode is maybe a bit of a push for this particular genre, but, you know, I don't know, maybe for people like me, I mean, I'm looking forward to playing with the progression a bit to see if I can make it a little bit more possible for me to get a very, very strong run in. I can just about beat the game these days, even though my hands are slow and I'm really bad at dodging things. So, you know, I think we're getting there, but, you know, it'll definitely be interesting to see how the progression stuff that's underway or being worked on will affect that. Any other final comments from either of you? I think that's all the questions we had queued up for today.
Not really, except with like, so we don't plan on implementing a god mode, but obviously, given that we're a roguelite, we want you to be able to achieve a state where you feel like a god in the game, right?
Yeah.
So hopefully some people are already getting that sometimes, and we want to make sure that that's accessible to more people, that you can have that perfect run where you can basically face tank the betrayer if you're strong enough.
Yeah, exactly. To feel like a god, yes. God mode, no.
Yes.
Or as Ando was doing, you know, stack up so much hatred that before the boss or before the betrayer even gets a chance to hit you, you already have it dead. You know, that kind of stuff is very fun to see as well. Definitely something I want to experiment with at some point. I did also see the Pixel Rick just posted a video of a sub 35 run, so that's going to be quite fun to watch later on. Looking forward to seeing that. Yeah, okay, in that case, if there's nothing else from either of you that you want to talk about, then I think we can go ahead and end this Q&A here. Anything else from either of you, or will we go ahead and wrap up?
Sounds good. Thank you all for attending.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thanks everyone. And for anyone that's you know, watching afterwards or maybe in the audience and missed part of this, we will, as always, have video and transcript of this live as soon as we can. We will be having another Q&A this time next week. And hopefully we'll be able to dive into some more interesting topics then. Thank you so much, Simon and Andreas, for joining us today. And thank you everyone for joining us in the audience.
Thank you.
Anytime. Thanks.